Jesus Christ, the lag is a little more laggy. Uh, Real quick, just for the next 10 minutes before I gotta go. Gonna work on at least introducing the idea to modeling time relative to existence, based on the whole theory and, well, the theorizing trying to connect existence to extinction, reality, and existence and truth over time, yada yada. Go check out the thesis on the page and the Google site. That goes more in depth into this whole idea and how this circle, this pizza triangle, rectangle came to be. And so, to start off, timeline in the universe. So, the initial theory, just going over again, existence equals truth over time equals negative existence or extinction. This is what we would view as the realm of existence if we took, say, for instance, every form of baryonic mass energy. Basically, like any rock, any physical object that exists, any atoms that are structured in the molecules that form a physical structure. Not, I mean, gases, I guess, would maybe still count as baryonic matter. I don't know where that really falls, especially when it comes to what determines if something's baryonic matter, if it still has atomical structure, or if it's just free protons, neutrons, electrons, stuff like that floating in space, and the quantum particles that are left. But the whole idea is just put all those atoms, put all those rocks, put all those planets, all those suns, stars, everything. Condense it into this point right here, and consider this as the total amount of baryonic matter in existence. Clearly, the complexity in the 3 dimensions, it matters, but from the perspective of the universe, it doesn't, because it's just all mass energy. Granted, the complexity and stuff does add the whole acceleration and deceleration, but before we can model that, we need to understand the perspective of time from the universe, as this friggin' train obviously picks the great time to come in. So, with that whole idea of this circle, right, all baryonic matter, all the free particles, that would be the extinction of baryonic matter. That's like the next theorized stage. But obviously, energy cannot be neither created nor destroyed, it just changes form. The energy that is decayed, that is in such a state that it cannot become baryonic again, or in existence, it can't be perceived necessarily by us, or like by seeing the photonic reflection of energy, so to speak, or basically like how we see light, right? Light is a byproduct of a reaction of energy. It's a visual representation. Clearly, in the quantum realm, like, we don't necessarily see electrons we can't really see a single electron interact with anything. Just like we can see a collection of electrons interacting over time. It's electricity. The movement of free electrons through matter, through air, through atoms. So, with that in mind, like, this would even include, I guess, electricity, but we'll freeze frame, for instance. Say this instance is at the peak, the maximum amount of baryonic matter in existence, basically right after the Big Bang, I want to say, or the moment after the Big Bang. No space is really created yet. It's like it's that moment where it all just condenses, theoretically. So we can take out the whole like the looking at the end of time where everything would just be quantum particles and stuff like that. This would be at the third quadrant down here instead, based on the whole fundamentals of the cosmic consciousness and the theory that I got on the website. So, given that in mind, time depends the following the theory, time depends on what exists. So, along the timeline, any matter or the whole diameter, for instance, is directly related to how much time is left available. So, say this is from 0 to 1, the midpoint being 0.5, of the circle, being expressed by the bounds, which we can say is the vacuum state. We can say is the just everything being condensed at that moment in time of the Big Bang, the big light, or whatever you want to call it, at the Planck length of time, whatever. We can, when we start implementing Plancks and stuff after we figure out a model for time, and we can start switching out variables for actual things to make this practical in some way. After we also figure out this relativity, so understanding that this whole timeline, the maximum amount of time, so one timeline, that's the unit of time that we're measuring, one entire timeline of the universe, because it's based on what's left in existence. That's what determines the state of the Big Bang, the state of heat death, or the big freeze, as we experience everything breaking down in the universe, and the acceleration of the universe. Just this all ties together. So clearly following Newton's laws and those axioms, those principles, those theories, implementing those concepts in this way, asking this question, like what determines reality, what determines existence over time, what is true over time, the one fundamental like reality that we're living in, what we're actually measuring. So with that whole idea, we can start using triangulation to formulate a way of describing the decay of mass energy over time, whether it's through interactions between mass energies, what's available in that space and time, or through natural internal decay, as we see with quantum physics and like chemistry, stuff like that. Everything once at rest, once remains at rest, and then energy, it eventually spends energy over time. Everything spends energy over time. That's just how it works, because everything's in motion. So, freeze framing here, using values from 0 to 1 being absolutely true, like absolute maximum amount, which granted, given the bounds and stuff and how things are determined, the quadrants 1, 1, 1. This is where we get the framework of what I would describe as the vacuum state. And we have the diameter in that beige color, the radius, which goes alongside the timeline. So now we have a way of looking at the entire timeline, doing some math in respect to decimals, and we can even go as far as percentages. With that in mind, we can start triangulating what T looks like relative to the total area, the total amount of energy of the circle. See where I'm going with this? So the mass energy measured in E, in joules, can be measured at the time of the Big Bang. The maximum amount of energy, or can be calculated. That total amount of energy at that point in time that's being looked at, understanding, like, I guess after like a Planck second, the shortest amount of time that's measurable. This might be a little different in size. This 0.5 might start tending toward lower. Anything below 0.5, as the midpoint fundamentally is just deemed as halfway at the timeline relative to what's totally available, because geometry, just the shape of how everything is laid out through the axioms theorized in this whole modeling, like, setup, and how we can use mathematical axioms, understanding truth, and the definitions that we went over in previous videos to come to this model, to come to this way of analyzing energy in existence and states of energy. And this can apply to essentially everything. It just depends on what you're looking at. So, from the perspective of the universe, taking out the complexity of the 3D, looking at this in the 2D, we have the equation of a circle for the area, which is what, pi r squared, if I remember correctly. Oh. Yeah, see, this is why I actually need to take time to do this. I did write it out a couple of times, but oh my god. Yeah, pi r squared. So, taking that, I'm going to have notifications for days. Go away. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. C in this case is equal to r, which is same here because it falls along the timeline, which the midpoint directly follows relative to what's left in existence. So 2 times whatever you get an accurate measurement time, you half the timeline, then you get the midpoint. I mean, duh. That's when you even think about it too. It's like when you look at half-lives, this applies. So, in principle, is very similar to how a lot of other aspects of physics has been derived from. But we're just looking at the model in basic terms of time and energy in existence in structured form, and like atoms and above. So let me do a text real quick, and I'll just add this in because I gotta go. Goddamn. Area not in black. Of a circle equals I don't know the symbol number, whatever, so I'm just gonna do pi r to the power of 2. I'll just write it like that. So we have that. Now if we can figure out a way to reference r relative to time, like the total timeline. So this whole line is t. If we can find how much of the radius is relative to t. So if I think it's t divided by 2 times the square root of 2, if I remember correctly. When we do the math out trying to solve for r, as a is equal to b in this case, because we're looking at actions, like states of existence that are falling along the line, this variance, but we're looking at the objective reality, what is actually happening right now, the timeline. This is consideration of what's probable, not what's possible, but what's probable to interact, what exists, what is available as a resource of mass energy in form that could be broken down and released into space, into free particles, to create space into the quantum realm, which will help explain the accelerating expansion of the universe as more and more matter breaks down to its fundamental, because we, at least from what I know, we haven't observed putting together quantum particles back into atoms. I don't think we've experienced that, and I don't think that might be possible. So, more on that later. But just to put this idea out there and how it looks like the math, if anyone wants to try to triangulate and work this out yourself before I do, go for it, or at least before I post about it. Go for it and check out the work, check out what's going on, what I'm working on. Unfortunately, I do not have much more time because I gotta go do a bunch of other stuff. It's like I'm literally working 3 jobs. This economy sucks. But it is what it is. So, at least in my free time, I'll post about this and gaming, and just as a variety streamer, whatever. Come by, come chat. I don't even have chat up. I'm sorry if you have been here. If you have not, then you're missing out. No, no one's here. Okay, whatever. Anyways, I'll expand on this later. More to come soon. I'll save as part 2. Sure, save it on desktop. We'll carry on from here, and I'll also load up. Actually, real quick, I'll load up. Open the explanation so you can see it. So, perspective of the universe. This is where I model the circle that we're looking at here. So you can see it kind of in context here. Oops, I don't want to do that. I wanted to do, nope, nope, okay. I want to move it, but it's not letting me do the movie part. But yeah, this is where I explain the bounds, which make up the circle. It's kind of rough drawn because it's just curves, but it makes a circle, trust me. And then that circle also makes a circle, which shows the flow of actions, which is counterclockwise to how we view time. It's just metaphorically and weirdly enough. So this is also on the website. You can check this out, where I explain everything and where I start. Also, the model of the equation of a circle, because using geometry, we can apply this as well. Once we figure out what r is relative to t, we substitute r in, or well, t in for r, for a model of the equation, and then we can model based on the midpoint, like the measurement of what's available, divide that by 2, you get the midpoint. So in terms of energy and everything else, and half-lives, we can figure out where on the timeline we lie, basically, depending on what we can observe out in the universe. A lot of that also needs to be in consideration of light years and distance, depending on what we're observing and how far away it is, and how we measure mass and everything else. Because this can be calculated with what we can perceive, at least in the universe, taking into account time and everything else. But there's a lot that, as human beings, we won't be able to math out, where we're gonna maybe need to rely on some AI here to do some of these calculations. But if we can get the model and then apply it to systems that can run these models, as we figure out a model for time relative to the universe and existence and what exists, instead of us modeling time based on how many times we go around the sun. Or just, it's a reference point, it's relativity. We can start looking at the universe as a whole, as well as applying this in the quantum realm, so the micro scale, to understand quantum gravity, because what exists is relative to what doesn't exist anymore. As we observe and experience the expansion in the universe, space being made between everything, everything's pushing everything else away from itself because of the expenditure of particles that add into space. Because all that stuff has to go somewhere, and it waves out its energy. It's energy that's a force that's pushing everything away just from, it's like sweating out energy as mass is reduced over time, whether through reactions or natural decay, or even inhibited decay from nuclear forces and other interactions. There's a lot of things to be considered, which is why what's possible is relative to what exists, and what's impossible is relative to what doesn't exist anymore, what isn't available anymore. So go over that more in depth. Anyways, till next time, this is Spark saying peace. Hopefully this is interesting and gets you thinking. So stay tuned. Goodbye.